folks, welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to review the offense from that Week 18 slop fest against the Steelers, the 17-10 loss at M&T Bank Stadium. And truly one of the most uncomfortable days to be at the stadium I've ever been. Here to do it with me is Gabe Ferguson. Gabe, how you doing?
Hey, Ken. I'm doing well. I can't say I'm jealous of anybody who was at the game this past week. It was not environment that seemed like it was very much fun to be in. Cold, wet, not my favorite thing. I'd rather be here in Southern California where it's nice and warm.
Yeah, there you go. Just to hold that over our heads. But it is something where it's better to be in a game that's 10 degrees than it is 35 and rainy. 35 and rainy is the most miserable possible combination of effects that I'm aware of. Large hail, that might be worse. I don't think they'd be playing football necessarily than that, but that could be worse. But anyway, all complaints aside, like an exhibition game in a lot of ways, including some of the roster choices and playtime decisions. And that's what I really wanted to talk to you about first is, were you happy with what was generally done with the roster and what was generally done with playing time in this game?
So I would have done it a little bit differently. I think the starters were, especially the important starters, were playing a little bit too much. Guys like Isaiah Likely, Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, the two tackles, Moses and Stanley. I probably would have seen maybe one or two drives, and that would have been it for me. Too valuable, too important to be playing meaningful snaps in this game.
Completely agree. By the way, all four of those would be very significant problems for me. I thought the both running backs were overutilized. You have Gordon. You want to penalize him for being a fumbler? We'll penalize him by putting him out there for more snaps in a game like this. Penalize him by having Dalvin Cook be your third running back for the playoffs, which honestly, I think we may have seen the last of Gordon after that fumble.
Yeah, I think that, there's an opportunity to check out a practice squad player, have somebody else who's available in that role. They brought up, players from the practice squad that barely played. So that's not a decision, you want to take advantage of that as much as possible.
Yeah, completely agree. Now they did bring up Adams, and he ended up playing a good amount of the game in the second half. The guy who didn't play much at all was Ben Mason. Played one snap. And I don't know what the idea was there. The team was incredibly short in the secondary, and it wasn't just those guys. Brandon Stevens played the whole game on the outside. Rock Ya-Sin is so far down the depth chart at this point, I guess it doesn't matter that he plays the whole game, but it does matter that Arthur Mollett, who's been the slot corner they can turn to, plays the whole game. And you have Pepe Williams. Basically, Pepe got, for the first time activated. I don't know why he's not out there playing some snaps.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at how much effort there seemed to be in actually winning this game. You look around the league at some of the games where teams had nothing to play for, and there didn't seem to be that much of an attempt to actually win. Now I understand, this is a rivalry game. It's the Steelers. You don't want to go 0-2 versus the Steelers. You have a chance to knock them out of playoff contention. You've done in the past, 2019, they had backups in and they did just that. So I think there's a little bit of pride at stake here, if I'm being completely honest. And I think it was a little bit of a miscalculation. The one thing I can understand doing is the kind of the game script where they're running the ball a lot. Like, you want to take as many seconds and minutes off the clock as possible, play as few snaps as possible. Every snap you play, you're risking more injury. So I think that part of it is okay. I don't care that they weren't, pushing the ball downfield. That doesn't matter. But I think putting some of these players out there for extended snaps, especially in a bad weather environment, that's where I'm kind of like shaking my head. Like, this could have gone really badly very easily. If one player steps wrongly or somebody trips over somebody's leg and falls on a leg, it can go easily the wrong way so easily.
As it did for the Steelers with TJ Watt. They obviously lost a big player. We don't know the status of all the Ravens injuries, and one that's not being talked about is Owe. Odafe Owe got up holding his shin. I don't know if it's calf or shin or what it might be, or ankle, he walked, apparently got off the field under his own power and whatnot, but he left after about, I think it was the second drive of the game. During that, he was a guy who would have played some snaps, certainly with Clowney and Van Noy playing a lot of snaps in this game. It's just, it very frustrating that a player like that, who's so critical to the Ravens pass rush, is out there for extended time. But, I do understand keeping the offensive line together, and I do understand keeping the defensive line together, because defensive line, they all had to play. They have 5 guys. They activate the same 5 guys pretty much every game of the year. I think they might have had some, not being able to finish the game kind of injuries during the year. But I think those guys, as far as I know, there wasn't another player who took I can confirm that for you right now here, but I don't believe there's another player who took a snap on the defensive line for the Ravens all season other than the Big 5. No, in fact, there were not. Jones, Madubuike, Pierce, Urban, Washington have logged every single IDL snap the entire year for this Ravens team.
Yeah, that is a bit of a change. It's good that they've been healthy. That's definitely a positive thing. And going into the playoffs, nothing on the injury report other than I think Urban had a concussion, but it seems like he was probably going to be okay with a week off.
Urban had a concussion in this game. I didn't hear that.
I saw that. I might be wrong. I think I saw that. But yeah, nothing too serious. I don't think. And that's really impressive, especially considering some of the bangs and nicks that the Ravens have had, especially in this position in years past. It's going to help them a lot to have that continuity in the postseason for sure.
So Urban played the third to last defensive snap of the game. So this is interesting to me. He missed the last one on the last real drive they had, and then I don't know if he's out there for the kneel down, because I automatically leave that column blank since that play doesn't count. But the play before at the end of the last drive, Urban did miss that snap, but I didn't see him go off for any reason, but it doesn't mean he didn't. I certainly could have missed it. Of course, Geno Stone got hurt, which is never a good thing. And with safety depth being what it was, but it really bothered me that you bring up Adams, and it still seemed like one of the places where they were really short in terms of healthy bodies was at safety, where they started the game with only 3 guys, and you had Marcus Williams out there basically the whole game. Yeah. So and he's certainly not healthy.
Yeah, Marcus Williams was one of the immediate players I saw out there. I think he had that. Was it the first drive, second drive, where he had that almost interception?
Yep.
And I was like, why is Marcus Williams in the game? That was my thought. Not why did you not catch the ball? Why is he playing? Like, he's somebody who hasn't been healthy all season. He's the last person, aside from some of the other names, Ronnie Stanley, Morgan Moses, they've been banged up all season. They've been playing through injuries or playing through, he's playing hurt, you could say. That was confusing to me.
Marcus Williams, just to be clear, he played every single snap, all 62 snaps, and had 9 tackles in the game.
That's something.
It's abuse, yeah.
Brent Urban was evaluated for concussion. Apparently, it was just a stinger.
Okay, so good to hear.
Yeah,
very good to hear. Lots of reasons it's good to hear, but good to hear it's not going to impact him for the playoffs. Hopeful to hear that it won't impact him long term in his life in terms of that. But let's talk about some other things here. Kind of a great DeVoa year, painted by this Week 18 game, which is a little bit of shame. But honestly, rest your starters and don't care about the parsley, the garnish on this this season. It's it's the steak and potatoes that's going to matter, and the Ravens really need to convert the Super Bowl opportunity while it's here.
Yeah, it's interesting because 2019 the Ravens offense was kind of like the DVOA darling. They were setting kind of records in efficiency, run efficiency in particular, and how well they were playing. This year is a better team overall. Largely, I guess, because of the defensive side of the ball, is playing better this year, significantly more so than it did in 2019. Even with the kind of Week 18 stinker, they still finished, I think, 5th best in tracking by that statistic over an overall team.
This is in the 40 years period.
I believe so. I believe it goes back to
Okay.
like 1986 or something like that. So that's
Hmm.
it's a very impressive finish for a team, even with that week 18 backups playing pretty ugly game overall, bad conditions, all that. So it just goes to show how dominant this team was in the first week or 17 weeks of the season, and largely because of the quality of competition. That's a big component in that. In that measure, the Ravens played a lot of good teams this year. They had one of the hardest strength of schedules of
Yep.
anybody in the NFL. Whether that's just looking at win loss or also by DVOA or DVOA, I'm not sure. I'm
I
not
say
sure how to pronounce
DVOA,
it.
but we've had Aaron Schatz on the show before, and he says I say DVOA, but Aaron Schatz says DVOA.
Okay.
He's the originator, so his
Yeah.
counts. But I'll still
So,
lapse in and out of DVOA.
all right. Well, DeVoe or DVOA, either way, that it does weight opponent quality, and that's one of
Mhm.
the major reasons why I think it's a very useful statistic to look at. It's very good at predicting, potential outcomes because it can be very misleading win loss records. And the Ravens played extremely well against all qualities of competition. They played some of their best games against the best teams, and that is definitely a positive thing heading into the playoffs.
So through week 18 right now, all that matters remaining is conference win probabilities and Super Bowl win probabilities. But the Ravens have, according to the DVOA playoff odds, an 85.4% chance to make a conference appearance, which basically says they have an 85.4% chance to win their first playoff game,
Yeah.
which would make them, by the way, about an 11 or 12 point favorite. So I think it's probably a little high. Winning the conference, 69.2%. And winning the Super Bowl 43.5%. They've now moved way out in front of San Francisco in that regard, who's down to 33.3%. But the Baltimore San Francisco Super Bowl, the rematch of Super Bowl 47, is now at 45.4% of all outcomes, which is incredible to me.
Yeah, and I really do think it's because these two teams are kind of the cream of the crop. I think they're head and shoulders above the rest of the field in terms of both conferences. The Ravens they haven't played all of the best teams in the AFC, but they've played a lot of the better teams. They've played a lot of the better teams in the NFC, and
Yep.
they've consistently won in resounding fashion. And San Francisco pretty similar, aside from a few games where they had some health issues. The Ravens losses, outstanding, not counting Week 18, largely games where they fumbled away. I mean, this could have probably been a team that's looking at potentially perfect season, if not for a few, mistakes in the fourth quarters at the end of games. That's how dominant this team was all year long. And it really took kind of those resounding wins against quality competition at the end of the year to kind of garner that attention on the national stage. But, I think by the end of the year, everybody was saying, yes, this Ravens team is a juggernaut. They're playing at exceptionally high level on both sides of the ball, and they need to be considered at that level.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, and you clearly hear it in some of the Lamar Jackson interviews, they'd rather be considered the underdog, and I would too. Let's say at the end of the year, when they're hoisting Lombardi, then it doesn't matter anymore if they're the underdog or not. And it's obviously it won't matter next year because you can't avoid it if they are the current champions, even if they lose half the team to free agency as they're set to do. They are, they're in a position where right now where it might be better to be the underdog. It might be better to be thought of as the underdog. And it's good at least that no one thinks they're going to have a super easy road through the AFC. I mean, there are national pundits who just, hand wave away the rest of the AFC. I don't think the Ravens are doing it right now. I think the Ravens look at their 4 possible divisional opponents and they say any one of this could give us trouble. And by the way, what I did is I looked at the upcoming games by the money line. And then I figured out what was the probability that's implied by that of each of the teams being the Ravens' divisional opponent. And here's the 4. So the least likely is Pittsburgh at 20.2%, and that's all based on them winning their game against the Bills. So they have a 20.2% chance to win that game. Any thoughts about playing Pittsburgh at this point?
Well, I think the Ravens would in some ways benefit because they just saw them and the Steelers are trying to win. They weren't taking that game lightly. The Steelers, they don't have a very good quarterback. It's going to be in Baltimore. and the Ravens are going to want to beat that team that they haven't won against this season. And they've been strangely very bad against the Steelers in the past 4 years. So I think there's a chip on their shoulder there when it comes to the Steelers. I don't think the Steelers are the best matchup, though, and it's largely because they have 2 really good edge rushers.
Exactly.
I think that's the biggest weakness on the Ravens right now is the tackle position and the pressure that can come from there. So it's not the best matchup, but I think the Ravens would still win that game pretty handily.
The chance of Watt not playing, does that change the calculus there to, I'll take the Steelers over pretty much any of these teams if Watt's out?
I mean, he's their best player, right? Mm-hmm. So anytime you have that player who is possibly not going to play, and if he does play, he wouldn't be at 100%. I think that is a factor. It's still not my favorite potential outcome if the Steelers were to win. I think there's other teams I'd rather play in that place.
We'll take a look at the OL play in the second part of the show, but obviously a lot of problems on both sides, and Alex Highsmith is just freaking rolling over whoever is lining up opposite him at left tackle. So Ravens are going to have to hopefully find ways to address that, whoever they face. Moving on in terms of other teams they might face, the next most likely is Houston. Now, Houston is an underdog, and they have to have other things happen. But they certainly would be the team if the 2 and 3 seeds hold up, and they hold up as well. But it's only about a 21.6% chance. They're a slight underdog against Cleveland. And so 21.6%. I'm actually a little bit fearful of CJ Stroud as being one of the best quarterbacks they would be facing again this year. Where do you stand on that?
CJ Stroud is a very good quarterback, and a very impressive year as a rookie. But to me, this would be my favorite potential divisional round opponent, just because he is a rookie on the road in the playoffs. They don't have a great supporting cast. You have, one very good wide receiver, Nico Collins, and aside from that, you don't have a lot that really scares you. Their running game is okay. Their offensive line is okay. Their defense is a good unit, but not a unit that's like stacked with talent. I think it would be probably the most optimal team I would want to play, just because they don't have that coaching experience. They don't have that team experience. They're very young. They would be hungry. I think they would definitely, be playing with, nothing to lose. But I think that's the opponent that I would like to see if it came down to it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you, and I'm really fearful of who Will Anderson was. I think he really showed up in the first game against the Ravens, and I think that could well happen again. But when you look at what's happened to Houston, how much they've struggled, first of all, some of that without Stroud, but also even when Stroud's been there, just barely getting back by the Indianapolis Colts. Yeah, it's a road game, but this would be a road game too. Jacksonville has not really been that impressive an opponent. They've had a lot of trouble, particularly in the last 7 games. I guess they've won 4 out of 7 to get in. That's not, dominating their way into the postseason the way the Ravens have, certainly, but just a team that's kind of struggled down the stretch a little bit. And I would agree with you. I think I probably would want them highest of the 4 teams, with Pittsburgh saying, not knowing whether Watt is in or out, Pittsburgh being the next best, not knowing, and the best if I know Watt is out.
Yep. I definitely agree with that.
All right. So let's move up. 28.1%. They play Cleveland. That's a matchup I don't want to see in this round. I want Cleveland, like Buffalo, to be somebody else's problem for at least 1 week.
I agree with you for the exact same reason that I mentioned with the Steelers. It's the 2 edge rushers, and Za'Darius Smith, Myles Garrett. I mean, that's a very formidable duo. They've given the Ravens massive fits in the 2 games that they've played this season. Now the Ravens did have some backup tackles in both those games at different points. But I think even with the starters out there, that's not the optimal matchup. And then they have other players. The defense is very good. They've been pretty much up there with the Ravens in terms, in a lot of ways, as the best defense in the league this year. So they're definitely a team that gives me some pause.
They are not getting it done as a unit overall anymore these last few weeks. They've given up, it's surprising, over 21 points a game now. They've given up a lot of points, even though I know they're holding teams down in terms of yards and some other statistics, but that's just, it's not that good a finish to the year for them. And Garrett is absolutely stud-like. I think Okoronkwo has missed some time recently, who's one of their edge rushers down. At least that's something. And Zadarius Smith has been damn good the whole year. Not the greatest finisher, but he's provided an awful lot of pressure for that team.
Yeah, and I think they have some weaknesses, like you mentioned. They're prone to give up a big play here and there. I think they can be run on. That's how the Ravens have found success against them. That when they've been able to kind of just like run at them and use misdirection to use their aggressive nature against them. And I think, a well kind of designed game that keeps on script, the Ravens can win. But having those two real threats off the edge can mess up a game plan really quickly.
Yeah, I agree. And I have some fear of Kansas City in the same way, even though Kansas City has threats across the offensive line. They're not all on the edge. I have similar, concerns about facing them, even though it would be later in the playoffs. Last team, Miami, 30.1%, the highest probability that the Ravens will face them. Obviously, they just beat them 56-19, but I was talking on the show with Josh Reed about this. And is there a team that with their speed, particularly if they found a way to get healthy with Mostert and Waddle, that provides more of an offensive threat to the Ravens? Not just among the first four. I'm talking about like anywhere in the playoffs.
I mean, I think San Francisco is still probably a little bit more of a threat offensively, just because they have a more rounded, I think, team in general. But I do think that there's similar teams. They come from the same coaching tree. They have a lot of similar concepts in what they do. The speed obviously is scary. Tyreek Hill, if he's in a matchup where he has single coverage, he can win over the top every single time. And if Tua is in the pocket without getting pressured, he can put the ball pretty much anywhere on the field. The key to Tua is getting pressure in his face, and then he kind of becomes a different quarterback. The Ravens did a very good job when they played of getting him uncomfortable. I think that the Ravens will also hopefully be healthier in terms of their defense, especially the secondary in a potential rematch. I don't love the idea of playing Miami in the divisional round. I think they're a talented team, but they're a team that also needs to kind of have things going correctly for them. And if they get off script, if they're having to come from behind, it becomes harder for them. And I think the Ravens are a team that can put them in a bad situation.
For that to happen, for the Ravens to play Miami in the divisional round, it means Kansas City is out. Yep. Okay, and it also means Buffalo won their game and then would face either Cleveland or Houston. So Buffalo, and I guess we don't know that Buffalo's either playing Cleveland or Houston. But Buffalo would have won their game and be playing one of those two. I'm not sure that's not worth the price of admission right there. Meaning, yeah, Miami's a dangerous team, and Miami can think real hard on the fact that they got their asses handed to them by 37, just a few weeks ago in week 17. But I kind of like the idea of the Chiefs being out, even though it means Buffalo gets a little bit easier game, because I'm just of the opinion Buffalo and Orchard Park is unlikely to lose during the postseason. I think the Ravens are going to have to get it done when they come here, in all likelihood.
I think that's probably accurate. It's a tough place to play. The conditions are often pretty ugly this time of year, so that's a neutralizer. So, if it's them in Kansas City, and they've had that game a few times already, and I think it's mostly been played in Kansas City. I think it's always been played in Kansas City. So, seeing it in Buffalo might be a different outcome. They're playing well right now. Josh Allen is dangerous when he's playing well, and he is volatile as a player. He'll turn the ball over. That's kind of what you need if you're hoping for the game to go your way. But they're a team that's definitely playing some of their better ball right now. Even with some of the mistakes we saw this past Sunday against Miami, they were able to overcome them and win. I think that Buffalo is definitely the biggest threat right now in the AFC. So, I mean, we'll see if we get to that point, but I do think that them winning in round one is probably almost a done. I think it's going to happen. Like I can't imagine Steelers going in there and winning, which means Miami potentially coming to Baltimore is a probability, but I also don't see Miami going into Kansas City and winning. It's also going to be a weird condition game. I was looking at the forecast for that one, and there's like a negative wind chill factor for that game. I can't see the Dolphins going in there and winning, but you never know.
Everybody says that, and yet the Chiefs here appear so screwed up right now. I mean, so screwed. They have not fixed anything. They won their finale 13-12 against a bad Chargers team. I don't care if they were trying or not. That's not an impressive result in and of itself. So it didn't fix the problem, whatever it was. I mean, it's just I've been hearing for the last 6 weeks that ain't no way that the Chiefs are going to lose again, given that they've got the 1 seed in hand at this point. And it was all crap. It all crumbled to dust in front of us. We watched it happen. We watched now the need for Mahomes to go on the road, and the fact that they're going to go in there. Yes, this is a 1-game reprieve for Mahomes with the West title to play at home and play his last home playoff game that he'll have for a while, at least until next year. And I don't see any reason why they should win this. Actually, that's not true. If Buffalo loses, they can end up at home for a second round, can't they? Yeah, they can.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah. So anyway, if it's certainly a possible, but you know what? The other thing is the line is money weighted. It's not count of idiots weighted. So if there is smart money believing that the Dolphins really only ought to be 3.5 or 4-point underdogs in this game, despite all of the other concerns about weather and everything. And when you look at what they have in Achane and the ground weapon they have and Tua and the various speed elements they have other than Achane, it's a very scary set of players. And it's not like the Kansas City secondary is right at the top of the league. Even their best player, L'Jarius Sneed, has had some ungodly number of penalties this year, like 16, 17, 18 penalties. So it's a tortured group in terms of what they have there. And I don't think they're going to win this game by weather alone. I think somebody's going to need to step up for them and make some plays.
Yeah, I mean, the Kansas City offense has been a completely different unit than what we're used to seeing. They just haven't had the playmakers. They haven't had the consistency. I mean, is it because they lost their offensive coordinator? He's been there for years and years. That might have part of it. They've also turned over a lot of their personnel. Travis Kelce doesn't look like Travis Kelce. I think they're leading the league in drops or close to it. There's a lot of just issues. Mahomes only seems to trust 1 or 2 players. So there's a lot of problems going on offensively in Kansas City. I think their defense is what's kept them in the season. Frankly,
absolutely.
Their defense has played well. Even though they do have some gaps here and there, they overall are one of the better units in the league. And they are a very good scheming team, very well coached, similar to the Ravens with Spagnuolo there. So I do think that would be a potential, difficult out for any team. But it's going to have to be a low scoring game for them to really win, which is a weird thing to say for a Patrick Mahomes led team. But I think that's true.
That is a very weird thing to say, but yeah, you're right. And Mahomes will be dangerous in 4-down football if they get behind. I mean, there's a lot of ways that Mahomes himself can still influence the game in a lot of ways. I just think Miami has an awful lot of weapons, and even though they've had trouble beating anybody good this year, or even staying with anybody good when you really get down to it, the only team, I guess, the Dallas was really the only team they beat that was really any good the whole year, right? They didn't beat Buffalo.
They beat Miami, but they're not that great. So.
No, I'm talking about Miami. Miami.
I thought you meant Kansas City. Yeah. That was their only marquee win. Any playoff team I think that they played, that was the only one they won.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this, but the Ravens set the all-time NFL record this year with 10 wins against teams with a winning record, and not just by 1 game, but they did by 2 games. No one else has ever had more than 8 previously. And the 3 teams that have had 8, I believe, have all done it since the move to a 17-game schedule, which is also really kind of weird. But it's understandable that the 17-game schedule kind of forces teams to be either 9-8 or 8-9, where the 8-8 teams weren't giving you credit towards this total before. So you get a kind of an extra half a team, occasionally that will move up instead of down. But anyway, obviously that's one of the things the Ravens have going for them is no one can at this point say they haven't played pretty much everyone. The exception in the AFC is Buffalo. But of the teams in the NFC, I mean, the way Philadelphia got rolled by pretty much everybody down the stretch, the way Dallas got rolled by Miami and whatnot. I mean, I know this property of transference does not exist in football outcomes, but it's just still, I mean, you don't need 7 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon to find ways that the Ravens beat other teams, by A beat B, B beat C, C beat D kind of thing. It's all pretty apparent.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to think on is the team that plays its best game. Which one is scariest when they're actually like playing their best? And I think that's the Bills in the AFC, because we've seen what they can do early in the season when they were healthier, and the Dolphins are still healthy. They completely destroyed them. They beat the Cowboys very easily. When they beat the Chiefs, and they're a team that has some sort of a track record. I know they have some of the worst losses as well, especially for a team that's the number 2 seed. They had some ugly games earlier in the season, and a lot of that has been random luck, turnovers, one bad play here and there. Their point differential is still one of the best in the league.
Mm-hmm.
I think all those things we talked about, DVOA earlier. They're also one of the tops in the league in DVOA. That to me is the team that is the scariest. I'm glad they're on the other side of the bracket. We won't get to see them until the championship game.
And right here,
and maybe somebody will knock them out before then. We'll see.
And to be clear, when you say they're the scariest team in the AFC, I mean the Ravens are still by far the scariest team in the AFC.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of every big game, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go on and talk a little bit about the game, and we're going to minimize our talk about the game. We're going to talk. There's elements of the offense that are worth talking about. There's other elements of the offense that are not worth talking about, and we'll just kind of gloss over. They were outsnapped 62-57 in this game. Doesn't matter, but it was nice that both teams were looking to get this game over quickly. That was a nice positive factor.
Absolutely. I mean, mentioned that earlier. Health was the primary best outcome from this game.
Mm-hmm.
The fewer snaps you play, the higher chance that you get hurt. That's as simple as that, especially in conditions that are suboptimal. So
right,
keeping it short, keeping it, it's mostly pain-free is the best outcome.
All right, let's jump ahead and talk a little bit about Tyler Huntley now and the game he had, because I think this does have some future meaning in terms of, first of all, is Tyler the right choice to be the quarterback for the playoffs? And I think the backup, and I think that's right, he is. But good, just because the Ravens don't have really other options at this point. But then the more significant question is, what do they do in 2024? Do they reset at the position, try and get a rookie who is going to just start the clock and provide 4 cheap years, which might make sense? Do they try and get an experienced, Joe Flacco-esque backup who they have to pay a few $1 million to, which might make sense, but they probably don't have the money for? Or do they keep going with Huntley, who honestly probably should make something a lot closer to the vet minimum than what he made this year? I don't think Huntley be a high demand quarterback out on the open market.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky with Huntley, because I do think he kind of fits, the Ravens backup mold well. He's been in the offense, different iterations of the offense for a couple of years now. But he is limited in a lot of ways. I think you can potentially find someone in the draft, but is that someone that is ready to come in right away and play? It's hard to say. There was some whispers around Malik Cunningham when the Ravens picked him up that they were planning on giving him, an opportunity to be quarterback for the Ravens, to be Lamar Jackson's backup. He alluded to that himself when the Ravens came knocking, that the Patriots kind of saw him as more of like a gadget player, wide receiver, whatever it might be. and they didn't actually see him as a quarterback. The Ravens might have said to him, come here, we'll evaluate you as a quarterback. And I think there is a real chance that he is the backup in 2024 and beyond for the next couple of years. You have him on a cheap contract. And I think that, the upside there is definitely worth pursuing. I think you have to keep a couple other players in mind just for competition. But returning to Tyler Huntley, I don't think he's going to be back to the Ravens. I think he's going to try and find an opportunity somewhere else.
I agree on that. And just to throw a few numbers out there on Huntley, Pittsburgh, they rushed 5+ on 6 occasions. That's 19% of the time. He was 1 for 4 for -4 net yards on there with 2 sacks. And this is one of the issues with Huntley is if there's any kind of a rush, doesn't really have any pocket awareness. So one guy who's most affected by blindside pressure is Huntley because there's just doesn't have the same kind of internal clock. Doesn't like to take off probably in the same way that Lamar does. Doesn't process the field as quickly as Lamar, and that would be a high expectation of him. But he has a lot of trouble, and this really showed up in his ample time and space throws in this game. He had 7 opportunities with ample time and space. Not a good percentage, 22%. So it's not like the Ravens are doing a great job keeping the pressure off him. But on those 7 times he went 1 of 7 for 16 yards. Disastrous. 2.3 yards per attempt. 5.0 with ball out quick. That's not good either. And 3.5 with pressure. That's actually about right. There are 15 times they got pressure. They got 47% pressure in this game. Huntley actually ran some offensive linemen out of pressures in this game, which was one of the things that was good about his performance. Is 4 times he got a pressure, and he ran out for positive yards and no sack, or he didn't have to throw it incomplete or anything like that. Here's a big stat for him in this game: 3.32 time to throw, which is one of the highest of the entire season. I probably across the league. Lamar had a 3.8 game or something like that, and then I think he had one of the second highest, which is in the 3.5 range. So 3.32 is extremely high. Did not do much with it.
Yeah, that normally is not a good stat. Hanging onto the ball in the NFL. There's very few quarterbacks who can actually benefit from that. Lamar Jackson is probably one of the few, maybe a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, players that can actually extend plays, survey the field, be able to actually, make good downfield decisions, on the run, in a muddy pocket, things like that. Generally, anything over 3 seconds is far too long. So it's not good outcomes. And I think the numbers played out that way.
It is very quarterback dependent, by the way. I agree. It did work out that way for Huntley, but if you are talking Lamar Jackson, a long pocket time is generally a pretty good thing. It means extended plays. And the other thing that's often lost in the statistics there is that it doesn't necessarily include the quarterback scrambles with it. And then quarterback scrambles with Lamar are going to have a much higher average EPA per play than what you get out of other if Joe Flacco or somebody like that say. So if you're taking that anyway, very quarterback dependent. And time to throw is one of those very misleading statistics. The guys who fire it out real quickly, it's usually because the pressure is just unbearable on them and they have it schemed out of their hands. Or it can be the other terrible side of that coin is that they have terrible pocket awareness and the offensive coordinator is scheming it out of their hands quickly, which was the case of Huntley last couple of years when he's come in relief of Lamar.
Yeah, I do think that there may have been a little bit better understanding of how Huntley can run an offense when Greg Roman was the coordinator. Maybe he had more time with him. He kind of knew what his strengths and weaknesses were. He obviously started a lot of games the past 2 years. And there's kind of like a bit of a figuring out, we're going to simplify the offense. We're going to have those ball out quick opportunities. It's going to kind of be a dink and duck type thing when he's passing the ball, as opposed to trying to do some of the same stuff that Lamar Jackson does, and that's just not possible.
Yeah. So a couple good statistics. Now, one more bad one. His completion percentage over expectation is -11.5. I don't know that any of this matters, other than to say this gave us another great indication that the Ravens are beyond screwed if anything happens to Lamar Jackson, and they really need to build their game plan around that, particularly with some of the great pass rushes they're going to face in the AFC bracket, they need to figure how to keep people off Lamar Jackson. And I don't know what they'll face in the Super Bowl because we don't know who they'll get if they get that far. But for however long they're still playing football, this January and February, they're probably going to be facing great pass rushes week after week. And it's really important that they figure out how to deal with that for Lamar, given what's happening at some of the teams that do have good pass rushes. One more Huntley point I want to make before we totally let him go on this is one of the plays that really showed up as just a terrible play that really was costly to the Ravens is Marcus Golden was opposite in a Highsmith spot, opposite the left tackle for a play at Q4 14-18. And Huntley made one of the all-time worst reads. And just, ball's in the mesh. He needed to pull it and run outside. Marcus Golden's completely focused on coming down on that running back. Left side was open. Huntley left the ball in there, or Gordon, took it away from him. We can't always tell exactly how that's happening. Gordon gets taken down for a loss of 1. Huntley probably would have had a gain of 5 to 10 on the left side would have been my guess. But anyway, I from the reaction after the play, Huntley kind of slapped his hands together as like, damn it, I left the ball in there. I should have taken it myself, kind of thing. It's the kind of play you don't see Lamar miss on that because his bias is to keep the ball anyway. And he can usually make a play. And that running back better be ready to let it go out of the cage.
Yeah. Over the course of the whole season, there's probably been like maybe 2 or 3 times where I've said Lamar made the wrong read. And it's possible that those might have been just designed to go that way. And he didn't actually have a read at all. Mm-hmm. One or 2 of them were, I think, on jet sweeps. I'm not sure if he has the same option on some of those. They may be predetermined. But it's definitely not something you see very much from Lamar Jackson. He understands that concept all too well. And he doesn't make those mistakes. He might have, maybe a few times in the past, but he's very, very good at making the right call when it comes to those types of things.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's all is baked into that great leverage situation. So we did have one fan ask if a reunion with Joe Flacco made sense. Is it for this for 2024? So if we're dissatisfied with Huntley, and it's not just a matter of dissatisfaction, it's a matter of he's no longer the value he was, in the early years. And you're going to move on. Do you pay $4 or $5 million for Flacco, or do you just restart at $1 million or less than that even for a rookie or Malik Cunningham or even Josh Johnson at the vet minimum next year?
I don't think I'd pay up for a backup quarterback, especially given the Ravens cap situation next year and the inability to probably sign a lot of guys they'd like to sign. I wouldn't put backup quarterback as one of those premium kind of positions where I'm paying a decent chunk of change. And honestly, I think that would kind of be weird too. Just to be totally honest, I don't know if Joe Flacco would want to come back here like that. He might. Who knows? I don't think he has bad memories necessarily of his time in Baltimore. Obviously, there's a very good run for a good stretch of it. Probably soured a little bit down the stretch, but there's a lot of blame to be laid around for that. And I'm not sure if this kind of stretch of Flacco play is really that. Is it really going to last? Is it something that can be consistent? He still seems like someone who's willing to put the ball at risk at a high percentage of his throws. And he's gotten away with a lot of it. He hasn't gone away with it all the time. He's doing a lot of interceptions as well as throwing for a lot of yardage. And his receivers have failed him out quite a bit. So, I think you can do worse than Joe Flacco as a backup quarterback, but I don't think it really makes sense financially if he's looking to get a decent backup salary.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot. And I think there are other, non-big Baltimore names that could be had for probably less money that would just make more sense as backup quarterbacks that would be possibilities. But I think the big payoff, and this is where you mine for gold, is the Ravens figure out somebody they really like, they think they can work with and get ready in 2 years. They have no immediate need at a top of the first round kind of quarterback. Find your guy in the 4th or 5th round if you want to draft or 6th round if you want to draft a backup quarterback. You got time to wait. And even if it means Josh Johnson is your number 2 quarterback next year, I don't even hate that particularly in terms of value relative to cap.
Yeah, Josh Johnson is serviceable.
Yeah.
He's not going to be someone who wins games for you, but I think in some ways he offers more than Huntley does at the position.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. We talked a little bit about the time in the backfield already. I don't know if there's much more to say other than playing time and the relative amount that the running backs really played too much. Hill and Gus played 50 snaps between them. The Ravens cannot afford to lose either one of those guys for the playoffs. But in particularly at this point, I'd say Hill is the guy they cannot live without.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. He has a different dimension to what they can do in terms of some explosive plays out of the backfield as a pass catcher and as a runner. But in addition to that, he's by far their best pass protector in terms of his ability to block. He's just brought his game up in another level in that area this year. He's been very good, and he's, I think, a critical piece to them moving forward in this playoffs.
Used as a pass blocker 9 times in this game. And this is a game where they really needed him as a pass catcher, even though he didn't. All the throws to him, even though short, were off target pretty much. And he did finally catch a ball and make a play with it. But he had 4 set blocks and 5 chip blocks in this game. So you're disadvantaging one of your biggest receiving weapons on 9 plays. That's a pretty big deal. And they had to do it because of some of what was going on. He actually picked up a blitz single on one of those set blocks. Other times he was just helping and on the edge, helping either Falele or helping McCary or Stanley or whoever it was. But he did a very good job. And that's been I completely agree. That's been a big improvement in his game this year. Do the same thing with Isaac. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think he adds that pass threat ability too, though. I mean, he can be someone who looks to pick up somebody and leak out and be a 10 to 15 yard pickup very easily. I mean, we saw him make a very key conversion in the Dolphins game. Was it 4th and 7 or 3rd and 17?
Yeah, 3rd and 16, and it was a short pass. He got it all
after 3 guys miss. Yeah, I mean, he can do that. We've seen that from him many times. He's fast. He's explosive. He can make a man miss. And I think, especially with Keaton Mitchell out, you need to have that threat in the running game as well.
Not only do you need to have it in the running game, I want it in the gadget game because of what it means they can do with Flowers. They can free him to go further downfield. Flowers has been a much more dangerous weapon the last couple of games that he's played because they've been able to let him get down the field and make some plays. And that's been so sorely missing from this offense. With Marquise Brown, Lamar had a guy he at least trusted to go get the football. And sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes he dropped the ball. Sometimes he overthrew him. Sometimes even Marquise wasn't open, but they had a connection that they could get to him deep. And it was significantly missing in terms of being able to draw away safety attention in the way it should to have somebody like Flowers on the outside. Let's see what else we want to talk about. I think we talked about being a little pissed off about the Mason activation because he only played 1 offensive snap. Ricard only played 12 offensive snaps, and this was a game. Boy, it seemed like Ricard ought to have been in there a lot. You want to get the running game going, and you want to help your tackles out.
Yeah, it seemed like an odd decision. Either play Mason because you want to have your player who's not really that valuable to the playoff team. He's not your body who you can use in blocking, and whether it's run blocking or pass blocking, whatever it may be. Not activating him, bringing him up, and not using him is really surprising, especially when you have players who do have a lot of value who are taking significant snaps. That didn't add up to me.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me either. In terms of the receivers, we saw some backups get a chance. Aguilar 57 snaps, Treadwell 43 snaps, Bateman 27 snaps, which is to me another guy who I'd rather. He's had a fair number of injuries in his time with the Ravens. I really, on this field, with route running be a big thing for him. He's going to be sticking his foot in hard a number of times. Just not crazy about that.
Yeah, I agree. I thought maybe you'll see him for a series or two and say, okay, that's enough. He means too much. they obviously weren't trying to push the ball downfield anyway. Like
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't part of the game plan. They weren't looking to really take advantage of some of the weaknesses in the Steelers defense. Why do you have him out there risking injury? It didn't make sense.
Yeah. Aguilar gets a Maryland horse racing state. I'll have to explain what this means, which means the payoff is going to be limited, but a star in the program means you're a mutter. Aguilar gets a star in the game book in this case because he really played well under very sloppy conditions. Treadwell was there. He made a nice catch and held on one ball, but he also didn't hold on to another ball and only caught one of three that was headed his way. Wallace, I think, had one reception in the game. I'm trying to remember it, but 24 snaps for him, and I'd have been perfectly happy if he'd had 40. And then let's see, that would have meant Bateman got 11. Say their 51 were split 40 and 11 instead of 27-24 Bateman.
Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing less snaps for Aguilar. I mean, I know potentially they were trying to see if they could get him to his bonus. That might have been part of the equation of having him out.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, I think there was if he got like 60 yards or something like that, he would have had a $250,000 incentive bonus kick in. He fell a little short of that, so I'm not sure if they tried to like get him the ball because of that. It could have been Treadwell and Wallace out there and run with Kolar and maybe have Likely and Mason rotating as that other kind of player, and I would have been totally fine with it. The players that have actually contributed that are rotational guys in your offense, I don't want to see them out there very much.
Yeah. We did not see any jumbo or unbalanced line in this game. Monken had been using it 4, 5, 6 times a game. Now he hasn't the last 2 weeks now. So it's a little surprising, maybe. I don't know if the 4-week advanced scouting rule really holds for the playoffs. I don't know if teams really will look at more film if they can. But when we think about it, the team that's playing the Ravens doesn't know they're playing the Ravens yet, unless it's the Pittsburgh Steelers who know them pretty damn well to start with. But the Browns, they don't know for sure that they're playing the Ravens, even if they win. They got to be concerned about the tape from a lot of different teams. So they may or may not have the throughput to really look at tons of film about this. But unbalanced line is something that if they wanted more of it, they could have done more of it. It just seemed like on a wet day like this, there might have been a good opportunity for it.
Yeah, I think especially jumbo sets. I think that would have made a lot of sense in a game where you wanted to kind of run the ball and turn out clock and be able to pick up some first downs. I was surprised it didn't go to that more often. So maybe they just didn't want to risk having an offensive lineman out there who get hurt. I don't know what the thought process was.
Yeah, we'll talk about the offensive line in the second half. Last thing I'll mention in this, and then we'll let this go, is that both Monken and McDonald reportedly have had interview requests made of the Ravens for head coaching jobs, and Weaver as well, for that matter. Yep. Very interesting. And Weaver going to Washington, I would be very excited for Anthony Weaver and very excited for the Ravens getting the 3rd round draft picks. But I'd be really excited about Weaver getting that kind of an opportunity. He deserves it. He's a great leader of men. If you've ever seen him at the podium, very smart. I've talked about this ad infinitum on this show about my respect for Anthony Weaver, and I certainly hope he gets a head coaching job soon. And I think the Ravens probably have other people who they can bring in for the defensive line. This has got to be one of the really top defensive line jobs in the league, and he's done a great job with it in terms of keeping these 5 guys healthy. That probably has something to do with Weaver's influence. I can't imagine that you have older veterans like Pierce and Urban who've been around, and a mix of other guys who are coming up and coming into career years that Weaver doesn't have a significant hand in that, along with people like Chuck Smith who've helped improve the pass rush. Yeah,
I was a little surprised when I saw his name pop up as someone who was getting head coaching interviews, just because he's been coaching for a few years, but he hasn't been in a coordinator position, which generally is kind of where you find that next group of head coaches. My initial thought would be if Mike McDonald goes somewhere else, which seems, like there's a high potential chance of that happen. Anthony Weaver might be the next person to step up in the Ravens defensive coordinator position. But to see him potentially move on as well, that to lose 2 people, and now that Monken is interviewing, we could potentially see a situation where several coaches move on, which would be difficult. We saw that happen in Philadelphia this year, where they lost both their coordinators, and they lost some talent as well. But it really does impact, I think, the ability of a team to kind of keep the continuity, keep some of the the same energy in the building. So, I mean, I want the Ravens coaches to get their accolades and their opportunities elsewhere. But, from a selfish perspective, I don't see them staying as Ravens coaches.
Yeah, of course. Always a pleasure to talk football with you, Gabe. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, love to talk about the Ravens and NFL, college football. At Gabe Fergie on Twitter. College football season is officially over now. Draft season approaches. That means so I'm probably going to be diving into that a little bit. Love looking at some of the prospects. So if you're into that as well, feel free to reach out and have a conversation about some of the more interesting guys that are out there, potential future Ravens.
All right. Very cool. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. Always, DMs are always open on Twitter. I'm looking for anything you might like to talk about that you're passionate about. Going into the playoffs, great opportunity. This week is open. Had some more people approach it with ideas, and we've got a couple shows more scheduled. So I want to hear more from you. This is how I also meet people for potentially other shows during the off season and other series as they come up, like looking at 2 players ahead for the future season. So if that's something you want to get into, just being on a couple shows during the off season, love to hear from you for that reason too. Gabe, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.